Every time it rains, you use an invention made by a woman. The company she offered it to said it had no commercial value. The patent expired. Ford used it for free, and the man who eventually mass-produced it became a millionaire. She died with nothing. Her name was Mary Anderson, and there is a very good chance you have never heard of it. Let's go back to January 1903. New York City. Winter. Mary Anderson was visiting from Alabama. She was in her mid-30s, a real estate developer and rancher by trade, someone who made things work for a living. She wasn't an engineer. She had no formal technical training. She was just a person who paid attention to problems and couldn't let them go. She boarded a streetcar in Manhattan. It was freezing, sleet coming down hard, and she noticed something that apparently nobody else had ever decided to fix. The driver couldn't see. Not clearly anyway. The windshield in front of him was covered in sleet and rain, and the only way to deal with it was to stop the car, lean out, wipe the glass by hand, and start again. Over and over. Every few minutes, in the cold. While passengers sat waiting inside. Here's what makes this moment interesting. Every single person on that streetcar was looking at the same problem. The same sleet, the same blind driver, the same ridiculous interruption. Most of them probably just thought, what awful weather. Mary Anderson thought, there has to be a better way to do this. She went back to her hotel room that evening and started sketching. What she came up with was almost embarrassingly logical in hindsight. A rubber blade attached to a lever on the inside of the vehicle. The driver could pull the lever without stepping outside. The blade swept across the glass in an arc, and the windshield stayed clear. When it wasn't raining, the whole device could be detached and stored. It wouldn't obstruct anything. It wouldn't interfere with driving. She refined the design back in Alabama with the help of a local designer. She filed for a patent in June 1903. The United States Patent Office granted it on November 10th of that year. Patent number 743801. Swinging arm window cleaning device for electric cars and other vehicles. She had it. Clean, clear, documented. The idea was hers. Now she just needed someone to manufacture it. She sent her proposal to a Canadian manufacturing firm. This was a smart move, actually. Canada had a large automotive market developing. The letter she sent was detailed, professional, and included her patent. She wasn't asking for charity. She was offering a business arrangement, licensing rights to a patented invention that solved an obvious real-world problem. The company wrote back. They told her, and this is essentially a direct reflection of their response, that her device had no commercial value, that it was unlikely to be of practical use, and that they were not interested in pursuing it further. Read that again. No commercial value. They were looking at a device that cleared rain from a windshield, and they could not imagine why anyone would want that. It's easy to laugh at now. It's harder to explain. But here's the thing about that rejection. It wasn't unusual. It wasn't a unique failure of imagination from one bad company. The automotive industry in 1903 was barely an industry. The first mass-produced American car was still a year away. Nobody knew yet what cars would become. Nobody knew that within 2 decades there would be millions of them on roads across the country, and every single one would need exactly this problem solved. The people deciding what had commercial value were guessing. They guessed wrong. Mary Anderson's patent sat, untouched, unmanufactured. Nobody bought it. Here is where the clock becomes important. Patents last 17 years. That was the rule. 17 years from the date of issue, the protection expires and the invention enters the public domain. Anyone can use it. Anyone can manufacture it. Anyone can profit from it without a license, without paying the inventor, without even acknowledging where the idea came from. Mary Anderson's patent was granted in 1903, which means it expired in 1920. And 1920 is precisely the moment that windshield wipers began appearing as standard equipment on American automobiles. Not 1919, not 1922, not some vague period after. 1920, the year the legal protection disappeared, is the year the industry suddenly decided the invention was commercially viable after all. Let that land for a second. The man most associated with making windshield wipers a standard feature was John R. Oishé. He founded a company called Trico Products in 1917, 3 years before Anderson's patent expired. Trico spent those years developing and positioning its windshield wiper products, and by the time the patent expired, the company was ready to scale. By the 1920s, Trico was supplying wipers to automobile manufacturers across the country. The company became enormously successful. John Oishé became a wealthy man, a prominent businessman, a name in Buffalo, New York, where Trico was based, that people still recognize today. There is a hospital foundation named after him. Mary Anderson received none of it, not a royalty, not a licensing fee, not a check for any amount. The patent had expired. Legally, there was nothing to collect. Now here's the question people always ask at this point, and it's a fair one. Did anyone steal from her? Was there fraud? The industry looked at her invention while the patent was active, looked at it and said no, and then waited, and then used it the moment they legally could. That's not theft under the law, but it's something. It's a particular kind of institutional decision, the decision that the work of this specific person, in this specific moment, wasn't worth paying for. And then the quiet reversal of that decision, the moment paying for it, was no longer necessary. She wasn't robbed at gunpoint, she was just decided against, repeatedly, at every stage, by every gatekeeper who had the power to say yes and chose to say no. Mary Anderson never invented anything else. She went back to Alabama, she managed her property, she lived quietly. She died in 1953 at the age of 87, more than 3 decades after her patent had expired. More than 3 decades after the device she designed in a hotel room in New York became standard equipment on every automobile in America. She never received anything for it. Automobile industry historians began to document the origin of windshield wipers with more precision in the mid-20th century. Her name started appearing in encyclopedias and historical records. Alabama eventually recognized her contribution. In 2011, she was inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame 58 years after her death. 58 years after her death. There are millions of vehicles manufactured every year. Every one of them has a windshield wiper. Many vehicles now have automatic sensors that detect rain and activate the wipers without the driver touching anything. The wiper motor, the wiper fluid, the variable speed settings, the rain sensing technology, it's a whole category of engineering that has grown and grown. All of it starts with a rubber blade on a lever. All of it starts with Mary Anderson sitting on a streetcar in a New York sleet storm in January 1903, watching a driver lean out into the cold to wipe his windshield by hand, and asking herself the question that apparently nobody else was asking. Why isn't there a better way to do this? There's something about the timing of the rejection. The gatekeepers in 1903 couldn't see that future. They said no. And they kept saying no until the patent ran out, and they didn't have to say anything anymore. This is a story about invention, but it's also a story about timing, about what happens when the right idea arrives before the world is ready to understand why it matters, about what happens when the people who could recognize the value choose not to, and about what the inventor is left with when the window finally closes. Mary Anderson held the patent on the windshield wiper for 17 years and never found a single taker. The day that patent expired, the industry found its voice, and she became a footnote. Her name is on a rubber blade that has probably saved more lives than any of us will ever count. Every crash that didn't happen because a driver could see. Every storm you've driven through without pulling over and leaning out into the rain. Every single one of those moments runs on an idea that a woman in a hotel room sketched out in 1903, offered to the world, and watched the world politely decline until the paperwork ran out. If that's the kind of history that doesn't make it into the standard telling, subscribe. Dustborn finds one forgotten story every week. Who should we find next?